Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current status of my Sunday sermon. If you're curious about how the sermon winds up, sometimes it changes a lot, sometimes it changes a little. I find this to be a helpful part of my sermon making process. I usually try and take a look at the comments before I actually preach the thing, and sometimes get corrections, ideas. So it's, I really appreciate the comments and the help in putting this together. And if I remember, sometimes I'll then put a link to the final cut that gets preached on Sunday. And there's a different YouTube channel for the church videos where I have my adult Sunday school class and my Sunday sermons, and you can find the link to that in the notes below. Why does Jesus persist? Last week we looked at Jesus' irreligious Beatitudes, his very strange #blessed. But there's something about Jesus that just keeps being relevant across time, across history, across cultures. And to not appreciate that about Jesus isn't really taking the data seriously. Now, last week we looked at the fact that Beatitudes, which are the first part of the Sermon on the Mount, which will be in for a few weeks, Beatitudes in the Psalms are pronouncements of future blessings here below due to religious performance. Do religious things and you'll get the religious outcomes you desire, or sort of, or almost. And you can find them in these Beatitudes. Let's just pick one here at random. Blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are to be praised forever. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. Blessed are those who have learned to acclaim you, who walk in the light of your presence, Lord. Blessed is the one you discipline, Lord, the one you teach from your law. These are just the kinds of things that you would expect to hear in religious service, not just a religious service in Christianity, but all across the religious world. These kinds of Beatitudes in the Psalms are pronouncements of future blessings here below due to religious performance. As a culture, we've been assaulting these things, though, for hundreds of years. Religious people are hypocrites. Religious people can't themselves live the way they tell others they should. And this is absolutely true. Prayer doesn't work. Christian people prayed over regularly die like everyone else. And this is true too. Prayer, you pray for some people, you pray for other people. They're always setting up these scientific tests to try and examine the efficacy of prayer. And just go ahead and do a Google search of that and watch the debate. But as a pastor, I know I pray for people regularly. I pray that they be healed. Sometimes they recover, sometimes they don't. Did my prayers make a difference? Did my prayers make a difference in terms of the outcome of scientific medicine? The right churches die at least as fast as the heretics and the godless. Yeah, that's true too. The culture has been assaulting this, basically what these Beatitudes pronounce, for the last few hundred years. Religious performance. Does religious performance actually yield the outcomes we desire? Well, over the last couple of, really since the 2000s, there's been, 2003 or so, there's been the great walking away, the rise of the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. And you can see on this little chart from this general religious survey that has been going on for decades in America, that the evangelicals, the main line began to decline in the 70s, and for a long time the evangelicals were sort of gaining at their expense. You can find that in the 80s. The main line has continued to decline. The Catholics, they've sort of been declining, but they've had a lot of immigration. Black Protestants have mostly held their own. Jews have mostly held their own. But the nuns, from, let's look at their chart. Let me see. Let me read it. Just about 1991. They've been climbing ever since the end of the Cold War. After we no longer enlisted God to fight the Cold War against the godless Russians, godlessness has been on the march. Now again, Beatitudes in the Psalms are pronouncements of future blessing here below due to religious performance. But what we saw last week is that Jesus' Beatitudes are different. there is little hope that these people that Jesus names in his Beatitudes will receive what's promised to them within their time on earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, because odds are they will be crushed. Blessed are those who mourn, because why? They are sad. Blessed are the meek, because they get taken advantage of and walked on by everyone. Blessed are the merciful, because they will get taken advantage of. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they will be contaminated. Blessed are the peacemakers, because wars just keep coming one after another, and winning usually means crushing your foe. Blessed are the persecuted because of righteousness' sake, because being good really works well in this world of winning, right? Jesus' Beatitudes seem completely counterintuitive. There's little hope that these people will receive what is promised them within their time on earth. They are the losers, not the winners, the losers. And their hope is not premised on their moral performance. That's sort of the old karmic religion. Their hope is not premised on their moral performance. Well, then, where can they find their hope? And a lot of people describe Jesus as a revolutionary, but my assertion is Jesus is not a proper revolutionary. Why not? Well, he doesn't fully set aside the old religious ideas. We'll see that in a few minutes. He does deny, however, its mechanistic temptations that we idolatrously try to exploit it. So in that sense, Jesus does critique old religion, that somehow religious performance achieves blessedness. He does critique it. He doesn't fully set it aside. What he does is deny the mechanical temptations that we idolatrously try to exploit. And in fact, this isn't a new idea with Jesus. You can find it in the book of Job. Proper revolutionaries, what they tend to do is they always promise that they will provide a new system or technology or regime that will work reliably in the short term. And if you want to watch this, well, we're in a presidential campaign season. We'll be seeing a whole lot of this, because if you elect me and my policies, then you will receive all these things that you want. Now, religions promise to work in the long term. And I've made the comment before, politics is about the now. It's about technology. It's about having a revolution so that now we can have the regime that will bring all those things in that we want. Religion is about the always. It's the much longer term. And this, again, just isn't true of Christianity. You can see it across the board. This is why religions regularly bump reward and punishment into an afterlife or another life. And so what's amazing is I hear all kinds of Americans now talk about karma, but most Americans keep their karma within this lifetime. And there was a Dutch soccer coach a number of years ago who fully embraced the idea of karma, and when asked about children born with disabilities, announced to the world that, well, in his opinion, that's because of sins that they had committed in their past lives. This didn't go over well in the Western media, because we tend to like to think it, well, adult responsibility or something like that, keep karma close. But religion for a long time has said, look, this world isn't big enough to actually have all the cause and effects worked out within our short little lifetimes. Now, the critique of modernist mechanical either-or morality sort of goes like this. Morality is supposed to be our guide to goodness, but we're always a little vague and a little fuzzy on whether that goodness is actually going to yield good things. We often see moral people lose, and we sort of recognize that. Do this and you'll be blessed? No, we know that morality isn't always rewarded. Religions teach morality. They almost all do. And they'll say, do these things and you will be #blessed. Religion doesn't always work. We talked about that. Religion doesn't always work. People who get prayed for die. Doing the right thing doesn't always get you rewarded. Technology promises to do these things, cause and effect. Politicians promise to do these things. Religion doesn't always work. But religion doesn't never work. Now, again, I'm talking about religion in broad terms here, not just Christianity. Religious people are happier, live longer, more successful, etc., on average than people who aren't religious. And sociological study, one after another, has borne this out time and time again. People who are religious are happier, they live longer, they do better financially, so on and so forth. And this seems counterintuitive to sort of the mechanistic assumptions that we have about the way the world works. Now, I mentioned that this has been borne out by sociology. The guy who actually invented the word sociology, Auguste Comte, was also the father of positivism. He was very big on science, and he recognized that people are very religious, and so he wanted to get beyond all of the superstitions and ideas and stories and mythologies of religion, and he tried to establish a rational religion that was complete with cathedrals. It had every Sunday there was lectures given on important humanist topics. In all kinds of ways, he tried to replicate religion, but without any of the, well, supernatural stuff. It was sort of a forerunner of what you can find a few of them around the world today called a Sunday assembly, where atheists gather together and try to sort of act like religious people without thinking like religious people. What's interesting is that Comte's experiment in this was a radical failure, especially if you compare it to, let's say, another experiment in religion, which was the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, which started a little bit before his. You can't find his temples for humanity around the world hardly at all. There's a few in Brazil, I've been told, but Mormonism? Well, Joseph Smith recycled Christian tropes and practices, and 15 million served and growing. Now, if we look at this, we could look at this as sort of a Darwinish evidence of the power of religion. We're not as smart as we think we are, and this rationality that we imagine somehow rules the world, well, when tried to be blown up and enlarged in terms of a way to guide yourself in life, well, it's remarkably more difficult than even sort of taking the King James Bible and refashioning it and having a myth about Jesus coming to the Americans and Jews escaping to the Americas and preaching to Indians and all of that. Well, that's kicking rationality's butt. Now, we get a sense of Jesus' both-andism here in this part of the Sermon on the Mount. Do not think I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. Now, the law and the prophets are, roughly speaking, the Old Testament. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. What he's saying is that he is going to achieve what mere religion has failed to achieve. He's not really setting it aside. He's completing what you can find in the law and the prophets. Truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappears, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Now, there's been huge debates over the centuries as to how we should actually understand what Jesus is saying there, but that's what he said. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commandments will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So right away you might think, well, we have to do all these things in the law. But the next section that we'll get into next week actually has Jesus commenting on that and saying, but I say to you. So what is Jesus doing? It's sort of this both-andness. He's saying, well, there's religion, and that's true. And in fact, this is true, but you're going to have to understand my relationship to it. And again, we already began to see that in the Beatitudes last week. Well, religious performance leads to these blessings, the psalmist says. And Jesus isn't saying no, but he's saying that's not the whole picture. I am going to come into this picture. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. What does that mean? Our righteousness has to surpass even the finely detailed, prescriptive, looking at the whole world and trying to apply the rules? how can we have a righteousness that surpasses that kind of granularity? Now, some of you might notice that I'm switched the order of these because I'm doing it in a sermon, and I want both of these pieces to be in the sermon. Jesus before this says this to his listeners: you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, what's really interesting is that salt of the earth has passed into our vocabulary with a certain idea of what that means, and that idea isn't wrong. The force here is that you are the salt of the earth, and what one commentator noted is that you are the salt of the earth and you are the light of the world would probably struck most Jewish ears as being at least implicitly polemical. Polemical against what? Polemical against that old religion. For it is not Torah or temple or Jerusalem or Israel or some group within Israel, such as the Pharisees, that is the salt of the earth or the light of the world. But Jesus' followers, you, is emphatic. And I posted this on Twitter, and someone said, yeah, and it's also are. Not will be, not can be, not should be, are. And you are the salt of the earth. And here again we have a sense of Jesus. Well, you shouldn't say things this dramatic. You shouldn't say things this open-ended. You should be much more circumspect and particular in what you say. But Jesus won't be edited. You are the salt of the earth. Well, what on earth do you mean by that? And so commentators have combed through the scripture and the tradition and said, well, what does he mean by salt? Well, salt was added to sacrifices. And the salt of the covenant is mentioned in Numbers and Leviticus. And Elisha performs a miracle and uses salt to purify bad drinking water. And in Job, salt is a condiment for food. Well, and we all kind of knew that. In the tradition, salt is a preservative, and that's one idea that we get. Salt should be brought to the table to remind us of what is right. In Ecclesiasticus, basic to the needs of man's life is water, fire, iron, and salt. And Pliny says there's nothing more useful than salt and sunshine. And Ezra says to those who eat the salt of the palace cannot be witnesses against the king. To eat salt with someone is a sign of loyalty. And Mark says salt has salt linked with peace. Have salt in yourself and be at peace with one another. Salt and friendship are tied in Philo. In Colossians, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt. And 10, in rabbinic texts, salt is sometimes associated with wisdom. And 11, Greek tradition, salt is beloved of the gods. And so again and again, so what is Jesus saying? Jesus is not just probably picking at these, but saying, you are the salt of the earth. All of those things. But how am I, Lord? It's kind of that nebulous religiousness, sort of. I can't put the cause and effect together. Jesus, if you would only tell me what particular aspect of this is, I could instrumentalize it and guarantee the outcome. Actually, he goes on to say, well, what you really have to do is stay salty. And again, we're troubled because, well, what aspect of saltiness, if you'd only be more specific, I could accomplish it. He says here, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And of course, the chemists will say, well, salts can't lose its saltiness. NaCl, that's what salt is. What is Jesus saying? You are the light of the world. He's doing it again. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. You are. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. I'm not even sure how I'm salt. And now you tell me I'm light. And it's exactly the same format, and it's repeated. The ubiquity of salt and light is part of the problem here. Apparently, humans can't thrive without either salt and light. They are commonly overlooked, taken for granted, but remain absolutely essential. There's sort of that loose religiously stuff here, but there's another element here of that the Beatitudes keep leaking in. There's a dramatic pronouncement that we can barely get our minds around. Jesus' way of living works in exactly this way. I don't wield it. I don't just kind of do it, although sometimes I do, and I certainly have to have some degree of intentionality and purpose and trying, but Jesus, why don't you explain yourself? This is as bad as the Beatitudes. And it gets even worse if you continue to the next chapter in the Beatitudes, because in verse 16 of chapter 5, he says, let your light shine. And in chapter 6, verse 1, he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. Well, what do you mean? Is it the instrumentality that's giving away? If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. I thought I was preserving the earth and I should let my light shine. And then you say, well, don't let it be seen. And you find this fulcrum, this tipping place that we can't seem to transcend all over the place in Jesus. Jesus, in fact, will be condemned by the religious leaders for his lack of religious performance. That is why his own people gave him up to the hated Romans who were over them. Jesus was insufficiently religious. And Jesus says this in Matthew 11. To what can I compare this generation? The people that are judging him, the people into whose hands he will place himself. They are like children sitting in the marketplace, calling out to others, we played the pipe for you and you did not dance. We sang a dirge for you and you did not mourn. Jesus, you're not on cue. You're way too religious for our instrumentality mind. And you're way too irreligious for our religious mind. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and you said, he's a devil. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and say, he's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. Well, when are we going to see those deeds? Tomorrow, the next day, next year, within my lifetime? No, it's very long. It's very, very long. Well, then what am I supposed to do to achieve it? You can't. Did you read the Beatitudes? Oh, but this isn't satisfying at all. Jesus is more moral than expediency wishes to permit. Jesus repeatedly looks insufficiently moral and religious as the religious machine workers demand for compliance. This reminds us of this story from the patriarchs of the lamb, behold the Lamb of God. And the beast rushed against the lamb, and the lamb overcame them. How does a lamb overcome the beasts of the field, for which lambs are food? That's what happens. And Jesus says, yes, follow me. You are the salt of the earth. Well, Pastor, if you don't tell me, if I told you, you couldn't listen and do it anyway. Well, then what am I learning? You are learning. You might not know it. You might know it later. It's sort of religiously that way, but it's also not religioususly and the mechanical machine religion we want religion to be, the religious technology. Your saltiness will likely irritate those who trust in mere religion. Mere religion isn't enough, but never has been. It's unavoidable, it's inescapable. We're all religious. We can't help but be. You'll notice all the different nuances of that word religion. You are the light of the world. Keep being like Jesus. Well, how? I don't know. Well, keep immersing yourself in him. Keep devoting yourself to him. Keep looking at him. Keep studying him. Keep trying to do what Jesus does. Oh, but that's messy. Yeah, it's messy. Well, that's religious. Yeah, it's that too. So I have to be in some ways traditional. Yeah, you do. And I have to be in some ways break from tradition. Yeah, that happens too. Not looking to win the world through your displays of moral performance. It's probably one of the biggest ones. Well, the religious people clap when I perform morally. Yeah, they do. Well, according to the other scale, those people clap when I perform morally for them. Yeah, you do. The moral performance thing, that's going to have to go. Quietly doing. Oh, it'll be seen. It always is seen. Quietly doing the salty, non-expedient righteousness that Jesus will lay out in his sermon. We'll say, well, I don't have the next ones yet. Yeah, it's in the book. You can read it. You've probably read it before. You'll read it again, and we won't fully understand it. It's not something we wield. Remember, he finally wields us. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.